The first Europeans who spent a full winter inside a Haudenosaunee longhouse came back out and wrote that it was unbearable. Smoke in the eyes, they said, day and night, until you could hardly read your own writing. Too many people, too much noise, too dark. They filled pages with everything that was wrong with that building, and what they were actually doing, in the language of complaint, was describing one of the most efficient winter shelters ever built by human hands. Consider what that shelter was up against. 60 people, one roof, 5 months of winter. Temperatures that fell to 40 below, and not one piece of metal, not one pane of glass, not a single chimney anywhere in the structure. Now consider this alongside it. Many of the earliest European settlements in that same northeast lost a devastating share of their people in their first winters to cold, hunger, and sickness. The Longhouse villagers did not. The men writing the complaints were burying their own. The people they were complaining about were not. So he made a list, this visitor, a careful list of everything that was wrong with the house, and every single item on that list was the reason the people inside were still alive. We are going to go down his list, one line at a time. But I want you to hold on to something before we start, because there was one line he got completely right, and it took 300 years before anyone understood what he had actually seen. This was the frozen woodland of what we now call New York, Ontario, Quebec, and Pennsylvania. Home to the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, a name that described not a building but an entire civilization. Every winter, the rivers locked solid, snow buried the clearings, and every armload of firewood meant another walk into the killing cold. Instead of fighting that forest, they had studied it. And by the end of this, you will understand why architects today are quietly going back to a house built without a single nail. Line 1. And it is the loudest complaint in every account we have: the smoke. It stung the eyes and made them water. It soaked into wool and hair and never quite washed out. It hung there all winter and it never fully cleared. He was not wrong about the smoke. He was wrong about what it was doing. Because the heart of that building was never one fire, the way a European hearth sat at one end of a hall. It was many fires, spaced carefully down the length of the central aisle, each one shared between two neighboring families, so that warmth spread across the whole structure instead of pooling in a single room and leaving the far end to freeze. Above every hearth, an opening in the roof worked like a breathing passage, and a bark flap was turned by hand to match whichever way the wind was running that night, letting the smoke climb out while keeping snow and freezing rain from coming down. No machinery, only experience, only observation. And here is what he never grasped. Not all of that smoke was meant to leave. High under the curved roof, a warm grey layer stayed suspended above the living space, reflecting heat back down onto the people below like an invisible ceiling, and held inside that haze, hanging from the rafters, were hundreds of braided ears of corn, beans, bundled herbs, smoked fish, and venison, in air where insects would not follow and damp could not settle. Modern architects call it passive ventilation and thermal mass. The Haudenosaunee called it home. He looked up and saw a nuisance hanging over his head. They looked up and saw February. So, line 1 on the list, too much smoke. Correction exactly enough. His second line was about the people. He wrote that they lived packed together like animals, and that one is going to be even harder for him. Line 2, too many people. He wrote it the way a man writes about something he finds beneath him: no privacy, no corner of your own, children and dogs and grandparents and hunters all sharing one long room, all winter, with nowhere to go. And what he was describing, without the faintest idea of it, was the building's heating system. Because a resting human body gives off heat, steadily, hour after hour, and 60 of them lying under one roof warmed that house without burning a single extra log. Nothing in there was wasted, and that included the people. 60 of them, under one roof, burned less firewood than 6 families would have burned in 6 separate huts. The Longhouse was not just a shelter, it was a machine powered by community. Privacy is a thing you can afford when heat is cheap. In that forest, in that winter, heat was the most expensive thing there was. And look at how they arranged that crowded life, because it was anything but careless. Along both sides of the aisle ran raised wooden platforms, covered in woven cattail mats, corn husks, deer hide, beaver pelt, and heavy black bear fur, lifting every sleeping body up off the frozen ground and into the warmer air that gathers a few feet above it. Firewood dried in the dark space underneath before it ever reached the flames. Shelves above held carved bowls, baskets, clay vessels, hunting tools, and medicine. Not 1 inch of that building was doing nothing. The walls worked just as hard. Each spring, when the rising sap loosened the bark from the living elm, wide sheets were lifted away without killing the tree wherever that was possible, then pressed flat for weeks beneath heavy logs. They went onto the frame from the bottom upward, overlapping like the scales of a fish, so rain ran down, snow slid off, and the wind found nothing to get its fingers into, with a second layer of slender poles pinning it all against the ribs. The Longhouse did not fight the storm, it absorbed it. Which brings us to line 3, the night he was certain the entire building was about to come down on top of him. Line 3. The house moved. It shifted and groaned in the wind, and to a man raised inside stone walls and rigid timber beams, a building that made noises like that meant only one thing: it was coming down. But he had it exactly backward, because the movement was not the failure. The movement was the engineering. When a builder went into the forest looking for the bones of a house, he walked straight past the largest trees. Old trunks are strong, yes, and stubborn, and rigid things break. What he wanted were the young ones, hickory and elm, ash and cedar, still slender, still willing to bend. Timing mattered as much as the wood itself. Cut in spring, while the sap was still running, a green sapling would flex instead of splinter. Then the poles went deep into the earth in 2 long rows, and opposing saplings were drawn toward each other until they met overhead, groaning under the tension while strips of inner bark bound every joint. As those lashings dried, they shrank and pulled tighter, so the house grew stronger as it aged, and not one metal nail anywhere in it. What rose from the snow looked like the ribs of some enormous woodland creature. So when the storm came, the storm found nothing to break. The wind slammed into the bark walls, snow piled against the village until the doorways half vanished, and inside, the world stayed strangely calm. The hickory ribs bent slightly under the pressure. The basswood lashings pulled tighter. The overlapping panels shifted just enough to swallow each gust, then settled back into place. It flexed, it breathed, it endured. And the truly unsettling part, for him, was not the noise. It was that nobody else sat up. 60 people slept straight through it. One man lay awake all night, listening to a building he had already decided was inferior keep him alive. The Longhouse did not conquer winter. It simply refused to become its victim. Line 4, written with obvious discomfort. The women ran everything. He was not exaggerating. The clan mothers held the authority to appoint the men who spoke in the Grand Council, and the authority to remove them. And on nights when the trails were buried, the great hall became a school, elders talking, children listening, knowledge living in memory and in belts of wampum, woven from white and purple shell, every pattern holding a treaty, an alliance, a founding law. The Longhouse was the physical blueprint of a nation. Line 5. And this was the one he found hardest to forgive. After a number of years, the whole village would take itself apart and walk away, abandoning houses that looked to him perfectly sound. He called it waste. But nothing in that culture was ever discarded without a purpose. Every spring, weathered bark came off and fresh panels went on. Worn lashings were replaced. Cracked saplings became firewood, and old bark found a second life as a storage liner or a windbreak. And when the soil around the village finally began to tire and the nearby firewood ran thin, they dismantled what could be carried, left the rest, and let the clearing go back to forest. Within a single generation, the trees returned, the earth healed, the game came back. Long before the word sustainability existed, they had already lived it. He called it waste. It was the only part of the design built to outlive the builders. So that is his list, every line of it turned inside out. But I promised you one line he got completely right, and here it is. Somewhere in all that complaining, he wrote that the house could not function unless the people inside of it needed each other. He set that down as a criticism. He thought he was describing a weakness. He was describing the entire design. That was not a building that happened to force people close together. That was a building where mutual dependence was the load-bearing material. Look at the whole thing, and the same logic repeats everywhere. Every curved rib borrowed the flexibility of a living tree. Every overlapping sheet of bark copied the layers of the forest floor. Every shared hearth turned separate families into one society. Architects still study those principles today. Passive ventilation, thermal efficiency, renewable material, buildings that answer to their climate instead of fighting it. 400 years later, we are still very good at looking at something we do not understand and calling it primitive. The smartest technology does not always come from machines. Sometimes it grows quietly in a forest, waiting for people wise enough to learn from it. If stories like this one change the way you see the ancient world, stay with us. There are many more fires still to visit. The list survived. The house did not. And of everything written on that page,